Hello, and welcome to Apollo Bay WordFest and our 28th Warm Winter Words. We bring this event to you from Garulpanut country, and we acknowledge the traditional owners of these lands and seas of the Mar Nation, and pay our respects to elders and knowledge holders from the past, of today and those yet to come. We invite you to find a cosy nook and a warming cup for your hands, because we have 3 compelling conversations to share with you, with women who are not shy of making waves. Our next conversation is between Sally Coburn and Beth Wilson. Sally is a Melbourne GP and senior lecturer in the Department of Public Health and Preventative Medicine at Monash University, although she's possibly better known for her 30-year media career in radio, TV and print, often under her alias of Dr. Feelgood. She will now introduce you to Beth.
Welcome. I'm Sally Coburn. I'm a GP and health advocate. I've worked in the media for too long. I can't remember how long. But along the way, I met Beth Wilson AM. Fortunately for me, not in her capacity for 15 years when she was the Health Complaints Commissioner, but I sort of found that we kept turning up to the same advocacy meetings and parliamentary debates, and we really like-minded. And the thing about Beth is if there's a mental health or a women's health issue, she's there front and centre. Now, Beth started out by putting herself through law school, and then she became a librarian, and then she's used her law degree ever since to really advance issues that are important for social justice and law reform and legislative change, especially for women's health and mental health illness. She's been the president of the Mental Health Review Board, and she remains an active member of the Mental Health Tribunal. She's absolutely multi-dimensional because she's also an artist, a mandolin player, a guitarist, a harmonica player. She's an accomplished public speaker, a chorister and a playwright. I'll tell you what, she's amazing. But now, she's turned her hand, adeptly I might just say, to being an author. And today I'm very privileged to have her here in her abode. We're going to have a conversation. It's the 28th annual Winter Warmer Words for the Apollo Bay WordFest 2021. And I'm glad that you're with us, and please stay. It's very, very, very wonderful to introduce you, Beth, with your debut novel, I'm so nervous, debut novel, The Lost Lovelies Foundation. Welcome.
Thank you, Sally, and you were very kind in that introduction.
It's all true, take it.
I'll accept everything.
Now, I love the in keeping with the whole thing about the fest this year, making waves. That's your middle name, Beth, and this book makes waves.
I hope it makes waves, and the sea imagery suits me really well. I grew up in Hastings, which was an incredibly tidal town. So we lived our lives by what time the tide came in and what time the tide went out, when the fishing boats came in. Saw some horrendous sights like huge sharks being winched from boats with massive rows of teeth and blood dripping, and I would have been all of about 4 years old at that stage.
There's none of that in the book, the teeth and blood dripping.
No, I just thought of it. It's quite good, isn't it?
Should add that one.
Next one.
Now, look, Beth, I thought you'd retired. You were Health Services Commissioner or Health Complaints Commissioner for 15 years, and I thought you'd retired, but now you're busier than ever. Why a novel?
Well, first of all, retirement is so yesterday. No one retires anymore. And I think while you've got a brain that's still working, you need to do something with it. Why a novel? I love books, always have. Again, as a child, Mum, Beth's been lazy, she's reading again. But my mother really encouraged reading, and I had little golden books and all of those things. I love literature. I was reading Dostoevsky at a quite young age, and Patrick White I still adore, of course. And just putting one novel like The Lost Lovelies Foundation together was a massive effort, and I really needed to test my brain. I'm 71 now. I finished the book just when I turned 71, I believe. And I wanted to know if I could sustain a big, solid piece of work from beginning to end instead of getting diverted by things like mandolin playing.
And harmonica playing. Is your harmonica around your neck?
My harmonica is always around my neck. That's the wrong end. That's it.
Oh,
That's it.
Now, look, I'm supposing there's people of two different types, maybe, or rolled into one, who are watching us tonight. I keep saying tonight; it's this afternoon.
Doesn't matter.
I know. See, it's light outside.
As what's his name said, it's 5 o'clock somewhere in the world. When you wanted
indeed,
to drink, yeah.
indeed. Some will be avid readers. Some will be wannabe writers. Some will be experienced writers. But everyone wants to know. Tell us about the story.
Okay, I don't want to give too much away, of course, because I want people to discover the story for themselves. But basically, and this happens right in the chapter 1, so that's not going to spoil anything. But our heroine has a baby, much wanted, much loved. The scene is at the hospital. Midwife has been working very hard. And this is when things went wrong, as they often do, really, in medicine, as you would know, Sally. Just when everything's done and over, you're rolling up your sleeves, having to wash, bingo, that's when something goes wrong. And in this case, the husband nips out for a coffee. The wife, exhausted from the birth but very happy, is sleeping. Midwife nips next door to see someone else. When she comes back, the baby's gone.
Oh, and that forms the crux of the whole novel, and what flows out of the grief, what flows out of the guilt, is really so many themes in your book.
That's the major theme of the whole book. Loss and that sense of justification that people sometimes get when they've suffered a great loss. This dreadful thing happened to me and I want revenge.
So it's really interesting because we really feel sorry and relate to Anita, the central character, and her loss, and then things sort of unravel as time goes by. And one of the themes that I found very interesting, having been involved in lots of charities, is people and how they, I suppose, lose the point of why they're doing something. Was that obviously the intention?
Yes, it was. The limelight, being behind the microphone, being in the spotlight. There are a lot of things that can deviate people from their true purpose because they start to believe in the media image of themselves.
So you've got these themes of guilt, of loss, of bereavement, but you've also got these legal themes, mental health themes. It's just a real patchwork, and you weave it together beautifully.
I hope so. I mean, that's been my life, as you know. I've worked in mental health. I came to mental health by accident and with some trepidation, I must say. In fact, Julian Gardner, who succeeded me in that role, he had a little chat with me, and I wasn't quite sure what he was getting at, but I said to him, "No, Julian, it's not infectious."
So, I think everyone would like to know, you said you've been working in these areas for so long, and different mental health, law, the interface between health and law. You've come across a lot of different characters. Are these based on real people?
There's no one real person in the book. I've not tried to paint a portrait of any particular person, but there certainly are bits and pieces of lots of people that have been moulded into a new person, if you understand. Yeah.
And I was reading it avidly, looking, do I recognise anyone?
Yeah,
but I didn't actually recognise any individuals. But no. You're right, I saw bits and pieces, and especially one character that we'll come to later, who has particularly interested me, and that is Anita's friend and healer.
She has a toy boy. Yeah.
She has several, I think, didn't she?
She had a succession.
So she's a very charismatic person, and one of the problems that I've seen in charities is there seem to be two types of people who get involved in charities: people who want to give back and people who want to make themselves being involved in the charity. She seemed to originally just wanted to give back, wanted to help people, but
she went off the rails. And this book is in no way anti-charity.
No.
I'm on the board of a fabulous foundation, the Satellite Foundation. I'm a patron for the Continence Foundation of Australia.
I love that. You see, nothing is off limits for you, because when I ask you why you're on the patron of the Continence Foundation, someone's got to do it.
Well, we poo and we pee.
Yeah.
It's a natural human function.
Can you just briefly tell the story of when you stood up to give a talk for the Continence Foundation, and you told a story and then you described how the audience reacted?
I think I said to them, if I'm thinking of the same function that you are, that humour is a really good way of getting difficult messages across. And I said that, so by the end of this, I hope that there's not a dry seat in the house. It worked.
As I said, she is a comedian, this woman.
Talk about making waves.
Yeah, exactly. So where I was going with that was what I noticed, having been involved with lots on boards of governance, was there's another theme inside there that I suppose people may not necessarily pick if they hadn't had experience. But I kept thinking the role of the board.
The role of the board is incredibly important, and I've also been a board member, so I know, first of all, your legal responsibilities are huge. And I think a lot of people that get involved with boards don't really understand just how much liability they could be running up. But we want people to go on boards. It's a really important thing to do. But boards can also be co-opted by charismatic leaders. And the serving of alcohol at board meetings, everybody being pals and never dissenting is an incredibly unhealthy way to run a board. And as a director of a foundation I'm involved with said to me, she said, Beth, your book is telling us all what we ought not to do.
I totally agree, and I think that one reason, if anyone's thinking of going on a board, read this book, because it really does give you insight as to how you can be humming along, going to the board meetings, and things are happening that you don't even know about.
That's right. And board members are busy people. They're often prominent members of the community. That's why they get invited to go on to boards. So a good CEO will make sure that the board members have enough material in a timely fashion so that they have the information they need to do their job, but they're not buried in so much that they can't deal with it.
What I think was really good about your characterisation in here is the character Martha. I think she actually is the central character, but I'm not sure she was meant to be.
She wasn't meant to be. She took over.
She did. And the reason I think when you mentioned CEO is she wasn't the CEO of the foundation. She started out as Anita's PA basically.
Yes.
And so that's her, and I love the way you talk about the fact that she was the midwife there at the time. So she had this ongoing guilt.
Yes, she did. And nurses, midwives, they have a lot of responsibility, particularly in times when resources are a bit strapped. And it used to be that it was always the surgeon who took responsibility when something went wrong, that is legal responsibility. But more recently, nurses, midwives have been held liable in negligence. And in one case, in just that circumstances where the nurse left to attend to another patient and patient one had a fall and she was found to be negligent. These students that I taught, nursing students, were horrified by that decision, but their lecturers, they thought it was a good, sound decision.
And it's very interesting, depending on where you are or who you are, you look at people differently and you look at issues differently. So the students thought, hey, she should have been fine because they saw themselves in that situation. Right. Whereas the crusty old, it may not have been crusty or old, but the lecturers would understand, no, we're talking governance here. Yes. And governance is an ongoing theme in there. Yeah. And you've got there's so many characters, and I've got to say, so many strong female characters.
Oh, that is absolutely deliberate.
I knew that. The Attorney General is female,
yes.
But they're not all very nice.
No, we aren't either.
No.
And we're not
you
always...
Are, I am.
Well, I
present company
days.
accepted. But just in that sense, I love the fact that I think was the Premier female as well. Like the Premier doesn't feature, but there was just a passing glance to the parliamentarians. I thought, oh, good on you, Beth.
Women are increasingly taking on prominent roles, but still terribly underrepresented. So I actually really enjoyed populating my parliament with strong, talented women.
I think it's the way we want it to be. You and I have both seen the rise of the victims' rights movement, and this book centres on this whole issue of victims' rights. I sort of cringed when I sort of saw where Anita was going with her foundation and trying to change the law. Do some foundations, should they stick to their lane and just, support people? She went right hammer and tongs to change the law.
She's a good example of what can go wrong with the single issue foundation. Charities foundations do much more than just one thing these days. they educate, they propose changes. They're not apolitical. But we also see the single issue driven type of foundation where their cause becomes everything. Again, because they've suffered great loss.
And we've seen the zealots, the people who come in and they cannot see anybody else's point of view. And of course, you show the other point of view.
Yeah.
You introduce us to the perpetrator, who is in fact a victim of life issues herself, and her advocate, the psychiatrist. And the interplay changes Martha.
Absolutely, and that was a really interesting structural part of writing a novel that I got a lot of help from my editor for, because what I did was I wrote what was a full story, but it wasn't a full novel, and I knew that I couldn't go any further on my own. It was just endless revision, and I wasn't sure whether I was actually improving things or making them worse. So lo and behold, an advertisement came on my computer. Do you need help finishing your book? And I thought, this is just perfect.
It's
timing.
Google does that to you.
Well, I got in contact with Regina Lane of Laneway Press, who happened to be an ex-student of my husband's, and she was a journalist. We met. I could see her quizzically looking at me, wondering about this funny old woman writing a book. But we struck up a deal, and basically she got me a fabulous editor who was able to take me from where I was stuck to a complete novel. So Martha's Climb is like an ascent of a mountain and then the slide down to the end.
And we'll come back to the characters in a minute because I want to go further into this. Now, you could have gone with a big publishing company. You chose to go with a boutique publishing company. For those people who may be thinking about writing a novel, what are the advantages of going with a smaller group like Laneway Press?
Okay, you're working together. Laneway's pretty new. I like that. She's Australian, she's young, she's independent. And another really good temptation is if I sell books, I get the money.
Well, that's always good. Buy Beth's book.
I own the property as well.
Yeah, I suppose when you're dealing with huge conglomerates, it may be harder to make that sort of deal, I suppose. But also, knowing you, it would have been very much about eyeballing Regina, and you think, yeah, she's okay, because that's you all over.
Well, it worked both ways, I think. And I think I also saw happening in her young head, I wouldn't mind writing a novel, but I thought I was too old at 40. But if this whole bag's doing it...
So that's an interesting thing. There will be people who may be thinking, I'm in my 60s or 70s. But what you've done is put a lifetime of incredible characters, mixed them all up and spat them all out in a wonderful book. And maybe life experience, it's never too late.
I think that older writers have had a lot of experience of life. I certainly had. And there's no way I could have written a novel like The Lost Lovelies Foundation when I was 20 or 30 or 40 or even maybe 50. Probably maybe around about 50.
You had a little bit of extra sort of help. When I say help, it was a hindrance that helped you get... Because I don't know how you have the discipline to do this. What was it that gave you the discipline to get this done?
I had a broken foot.
You're grounded.
I was totally grounded, and for the first fortnight I wasn't allowed to move at all. And then I had to really take it easy while this triple fusion and lots of nuts and bolts in my foot mended. So I did some painting and some music, but once I really got going on the book, I just got into that mood that they call flow. I know
occasionally I'd ring you up because I'd ring you up and say, what do you think about this, Beth? And you, I'm in the middle of writing a chapter. And so how do you discipline yourself? Like I sort of thought, God, I'd love to write a novel after reading yours. And I thought, but I haven't got the sort of stick-to-itness. Do you do it as say, I'm going to do 4 hours a day, or how do you do it?
I do it by saying, will everyone else please piss off and let me write? I mean, the actual process of creating is so, for me, enjoyable, rewarding, because by then I was well and truly ready. and I just could not wait to get to that computer and get into it.
And were you living it? Were you living the foundation?
Utterly. Even in the first draft, which embarrasses me now to think about, but my husband doesn't read novels at all. He reads factual stuff or political stuff, environmental things, but he was here one day and he said, I've got to go, I've got a novel to finish reading.
Well, I know. I'm going to say this. I'm not going to say who it was, but there was an event in the book that just blew me away. I gasped, I teared up, and I texted you. And I used the name of the character, who happens to be a mutual friend of ours. And you thought, oh my God, what's happened to her?
Yes, I did. That was awful.
So, as I said, you didn't quite answer. How long do you do at a sitting? Do you spend hours, or do you say, no, I'm going to do 2 hours of work now?
Well, you need to go to the dunny about once every 2.5 hours. So,
Continence Foundation.
Yeah, click. So I wouldn't sit for longer than 2.5 hours without a bit of a break.
Which is very important from your well-being. You've got to get up and walk around.
You do.
Indeed. So, what about getting back to the charities? This charity, some charities get support from the government, some don't. And one of the things, if they change from their purpose, which for these people was supporting victims of these crimes, to being political advocates, there's problems potentially with their funding, isn't there?
There are problems with their funding, and that's nowadays looked at by the Charities Commissioner. And that's a relatively new thing, because, Sally, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of charities that just prop up from nowhere. Most of them, as I say, do a really good job, but they do need to be regulated. And you and I have both seen story after story after story where a charity with the best of intentions goes off the rails, and more money gets spent on administrative costs, and less goes to where it's supposed to go, and that is in the direction that the donors have donated the money for.
And what I love about the way you did this is you're going along reading it and you think, oh yeah, look, that's great, aren't they doing great work? And you think, hang on. and you sort of, I feel you do live it through Martha, and Martha has some conflicts herself along the way, and and there's a little bit of, look, you've got everything. There's a bit of love, bit of bit of sex.
I have to confess, I found the sex really difficult to write about.
I had it difficult to read. You're my friend.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's because my characters are quite old when they finally get in the cot together.
But good on you, Beth, for making that happen.
Yeah, but I did find that kind of awkward. I was sitting here one day with the editor, and she said, oh, how did you go with the sex, Beth? And I just pulled my jumper over my head and hid, and she said, you can come out, it's all right. All authors hate writing about sex. Well, some of the ones I've read seem to be enjoying it rather a little too much.
Have to agree with that. I think one of the really interesting things is, and having been with you on several legislative reforms, you really portray the way legislative change happens. And in this case, it seems like such a good idea at the start, and then you take us on this journey and you question your own view of things.
Yeah, well, I worked in policy in the Department of Health for a few years, and it was really, really interesting. The consultative process, the process of getting legislation drafted, getting it through the House was really interesting stuff. But parliaments these days work on a legislative kind of scoreboard. How many bits of legislation do we get up? But they rarely evaluate what the outcome of what's been passed as a law.
The other thing I thought that was sort of subtly flowing underneath it was the political aspect of this is pretty popular.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, we've got to really watch the way Parliament does new laws, that it is equitable and not just necessarily a few people with loud voices, which Anita Hammond-Jones is charismatic, has a loud voice.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yep. And she draws people to her. But the novel is set in an election year, in the lead up to an election, and that's obviously deliberate because that's when you see a lot of that activity happening.
I suppose this really, you know, all these topics, legislative reform and charities and funding, leads me to ask the question, you're an academic writer. You also write in the lay press. Why put this in a novel and not go and write a nice little journal article?
Novels can do things and reach people that an academic article might not. Also, I hate footnotes. The footnote has taken over the world.
I know.
You read journals, there's more bloody footnotes than there is text. It's just crazy. So I like that freedom of being able to synthesise, bring ideas together and let it flow.
Alyssa is a little shining light in your book.
Yeah,
She's the research student.
Yeah.
And I thought it's really interesting. You've got this Anita out there in the media spotlight and Alyssa just doing her stuff. And you really have to watch the reader. Your phone, that's your phone ringing.
Oh, it stopped. Blessedly, it stopped. I do like trains too.
I like your train.
It's sort of...
A bit like that. So Alyssa is the research student and she's actually makes a really important contribution, but she's in the background, unlike Anita. And so is it sort of, are you trying to contrast how you can get things done behind the scenes and in front of the scenes?
We need both of those things. Obviously, Anita's a populariser. She gets ideas out there and heard. Alyssa works hard in the library, in the study, doing that really tedious sometimes work of gathering data, testing hypotheses, and evaluation.
I got the feeling there's going to be a sequel and Alyssa will shine in the sequel.
I am writing my second novel now and I'm about getting through that really, really well. And it's becoming a bit my brand that there is a legal, obviously, because you write about
But
what
of
you know.
course,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah. So the second one doesn't actually have her as a character, though. That's not a bad idea. I might steal that
Bring
from
her
you.
in. She can come into it, of course. She could be like your Hercule Poirot. She's
Yeah.
sort of-
Although my editor is guiding me towards not doing too much the same as I did in the first book. And go ahead.
Now let's talk about the media, because you and I have great experience in the media and the media plays quite a pivotal role in this. Were you trying to sort of also alert people to the role of the media in how these things can roll out, especially in an election year?
The media is an incredible part of the total picture of the way that we govern ourselves. We've got the Parliament, we've got the executive, we've got, is it called the third estate or the fourth estate or something in media? Anyway, they're there watching, helping to make people accountable, but often they have their own agendas. And particularly where you've got monopoly ownership of media and there's not enough competition. And we've seen a lot of that in this country.
Your media characters are fascinating because you expect... you just said, especially when there's a monopoly, but one of your characters is very strong, Jamie, very strong in that he recognised that he may have a conflict of interest, but he also gave a leg up to another character.
Well, Jack Ruler is the old guy. He's the obligatory drunkard journalist, I suppose. But he's also a damn good journalist and he understands the importance of journalistic independence and integrity. Doesn't always get an opportunity to live it, but he knows what it is, and that's what he teaches young Jamie. Jamie is aware of all those things, but again, he's a fairly horny young male and has his own priorities.
But I'm not going to say what happens in the end, but just loved it.
Good.
Yeah, no, and on that one, there is a twist at the end, and you'll love it. Look, I've got to say, you've got all these incredibly important themes, and it is a great way to learn, I suppose, about governance, about advocacy, and about accountability. But it's a strapping good yarn.
Well, look, if it didn't do that last thing, it'd be a waste of time. Yeah. I might as well just do the academic paper.
Yeah, no, it's fabulous. So let's talk about the other side, the perpetrator. And you bring into the whole mental health system. And because we get to meet her, and I love the way you do your chapters. Your chapters have character names. Each one is a character. So you're seeing it from someone else's point of view. And I love it because I don't know what the timeline is. There's no sense of how long this is taking.
That was deliberate.
Yeah.
Yeah. because I wanted the ideas and the story to float in time, so that it could be as relevant today as it was 20 years ago. But also I liked having each character speak directly to the reader. This is my perspective. And all those perspectives become part of the jigsaw pieces that make up the total picture.
Oh, absolutely. And you as I said earlier, you weave it together beautifully as it culminates at the end. But let's talk about Jennifer. Jennifer is the perpetrator. And we at the beginning, but we sort of start to understand Jennifer a bit more and the system she's caught up in.
Well, I think that if you knew any prisoners, you probably wouldn't be able to have just that black and white view, you good, me good, you bad. People are more complex than that. And the situations in which they find themselves are more complex than that. And she is as much a victim in many ways as Anita is.
Helene is the psychiatrist, and I felt for Helene. She probably was advocating for her patient, possibly overstepping the mark. I mean, I'm just wondering, when you were writing it, whether should doctors go to those extremes of contacting? Yeah,
if you think about forensic medicine, it's been the poor cousin of prison services. Prisons are overlooked anyway. They're not going to be vote winners at any time. There's never a vote in prisons. But forensic medicine it's taken a back seat. The facilities have been appalling. Thomas Embling has improved things enormously thanks to the work of Paul Mullen and his dedicated team of people. But that's overcrowded now and people can't get in and get the services that they need. And in the end, people who are in prison are going to come out someday.
Maybe. Then again, if certain laws get passed according to your book, maybe not.
Well, yeah, then you have to ask, to what extent does society have a right to punish an individual?
Yeah.
To where they are changed totally as a person. I mean, if you're going to lock people up, you have a duty of care to do something with them in that time that will help to protect the community, and that's called rehabilitation.
Yeah, and there's retribution and rehabilitation, and Anita sort of was only interested in retribution.
Yes, yeah, and a lot of people are like her.
Yeah, and you beautifully painted that story of looking at it from the other angle.
Oh, good.
There's an evil person in your book who just sort of stands in the background with a black cape on, I reckon. That's Marcel.
Oh, yes. I've met a few Marcels.
Are there Marcels in real life? I mean, this guy was a charlatan.
Yes, and there's many of them in real life. And again, he's made up of a whole lot of people and ideas. But I had to investigate many a charlatan, posing as healers, doctors. They really like as their victim vulnerable women who have terminal cancer and a lot of money.
So you've got the charismatic Anita getting taken in by the charismatic Marcel.
Yeah.
And I mean, I suppose there's messages here. We need to be able to pick these people and get over our, oh my God, aren't they fabulous? But how do you do that?
Well, good governance, good regulation. I mean, the individual doesn't have to do all those things themselves. That's why we have government. It's their responsibility to make sure that we have laws, structures in place so that the evil charlatans don't win.
What I like is in your book is, and I think you alluded to it earlier, the characters are multifaceted. They're not completely bad and completely good. We don't necessarily. You kindly save us from too much Marcel, but he's there lurking in the background all the time. But that's a real art, to be able to make us love and hate and not so sure, and you do it brilliantly.
Well, thank you very much. If I do, that's a real achievement because we are all complex beings, and sometimes I'm better than I am at other times. But I have my core values, and that's what directs me.
And what you're showing here in your book is some people's core values get lost in the mist.
I think greed is probably the overwhelming factor that take people away from altruistic good goals.
Is there any significance in the oh look, that's a card from you. Is there any and I didn't got to the end and then read the acknowledgements and I'm listed. Thank you, Beth.
Of course you were.
Any significance in the actual logo?
Yes. One big problem in hospitals, particularly in wards where people have respiratory problems, is strong smelling flowers. Relatives come in with beautiful flowers that have gorgeous scents, but in an enclosed space with air conditioning, often quite warm, that can be really oppressive. The good old gerbera is a daisy. It's bright and cheerful and hopeful, but it doesn't have a perfume. So it's quite safe in hospital wards. And of course, Anita targets people who've had babies, people who are in hospital, to get lots of donations from. She's even got her foundation set up in the foyer of a hospital.
There's another interesting thing that I've dealt with people who have worked in these areas. You spend a lot of time talking with, in the book, the people who are taking the calls. And they answer these calls, and it feels a bit like radio, a little bit, and dealing day after day with people ringing up with their incredible grief. And there was only one person mainly doing that.
Yeah, and that was to bring the reader back to the real job that the foundation should be doing. Anita's out there in the lamplight? In the lamplight. Sounds like a butcher shop, doesn't it? In the limelight. Well, let's go back to the grocer. And getting all the glory and starting to believe in her own image, doing the television.
Wearing the shoes and drinking the champagne.
That's it, having the great life. And Leanne is back listening to the grief and the trauma that people who've had children who've been involved in criminal activity, and so have had crimes perpetrated on them, and hearing that raw grief and understanding how vulnerable they are.
And you beautifully portray how hard Leanne works by another character who is told, now, you go and answer the phones for a while, and Mark, and Mark, he just throws his hands up in the air and can't do it and says, Martha, come and take this call.
And he also does something much worse than that. He starts talking to grieving parents about his own loss. And his own story. They're not there to listen to him. They should be there to hear what the callers are saying.
I'm sure that people watching us today have realised there is a myriad of really rich characters in your book, and they all have a take-home message. There's something you can actually learn from them. So not only do you get entertained, but you also learn, which it really, we talked about, why not write a journal article? Because you get it all in here anyway.
Well, I hope so. You don't get your evidence, and you can't go and look up the sources and find out where it came from. But the ideas,
and it gets you questioning your own values. And it's also, if you're on a board, thinks, oh, do I actually take enough time to read those notes? And I mean, your characterisation also of the people on the board. You've got a crusty old ex-homicide guy, and he's fantastic.
I like him.
I do too. I thought he was great. And you've got the sort of very, very rich lady that they all try to get her money, and she's great. There's once they get her money, I mean, they want her to donate, sorry. But what about donating? Is there any comment, do you think, that comes out of the book about where you give your money?
Yeah, there's an organisation called the Young Philanthropists or something like that. And I went along to a meeting just like this where about 5 charities all set up a table. The school children are given $35 by their parents to come and do this. They buy tokens, they sit down at each table and they hear what it is you are offering to children through your foundation or your charity. And the kids do that, and they give tokens in a jar to the charities that they think are doing the best job. And they ask incredibly insightful questions. It was one foundation bought presents for kids for Christmas. That was their role. And a 6-year-old, I would say about 6, said, no, probably even 4-year-old, said, well, I think it's really good that you buy presents for the children, but why can't Father Christmas help you with that? I watched with great interest to see what the answer was going to be. And it was a good answer. She said, well, Father Christmas is incredibly busy and can do with a bit of help.
So have we got enough oversight, enough accountability in this country for charities? Because as you said right at the beginning, there's thousands of very small charities, and can they possibly be doing much with the money that they're getting when they've got to pay their staff?
And you've got to have administrative costs, of course you do, otherwise you wouldn't be able to run the show. But it's how much goes into admin and how much goes into self-aggrandisement and how much actually goes to the cause that you're supposed to be collecting for.
And especially if you're on a board. If you're on the board, you've got to make sure what money is going in and out.
Yeah. Well, you should be at least keeping a very careful overview of that.
I would have thought the moe and the catered meals at the board meetings might have sort of given them a clue.
Yes, but then as Anita says, we don't pay them. They give us their services for free. What we give them is a family and some jolly good food.
Let's get on to your advice to someone who's now enthused to write their own novel. What's your advice?
Depends how much experience they've had. It depends whether they're willing to pay to learn how to write better. And I was able to do that. And it was money well spent from my point of view. But I mainly wanted to keep the control over my book. And I was on a panel of authors, literary lawyers or something it was called. And when I said that, and I said, if I sell a book, I get the money, one of the other authors said very sadly, I get $2.50 when I sell a book. So, you know, that's... And to actually lose your ownership of the copyright material would be of great concern to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So obviously I presume you're proud. You've had some amazing responses from colleagues, and people have come out of the woodwork, and they're all uniformly absolutely enamoured in your book. I'm not just saying that.
No, look, I was thrilled with the effort that a lot of people put into their reviews. There's about 9, I think, on Goodreads, which I hadn't actually known about before. And people, they've not just said, oh, I like the book, I like the characters, well done. They've thoroughly looked at it and dissected it. And some of those people have lived through the same events, just like you and I have.
What's really good about that is encouraging people to write reviews,
Yes.
because it does sort of give you that feedback to say, well, I did something right, I can go and try another one.
And look, people have picked up on extraordinary things. One of my dear friends, Rowan, he said that I hope this doesn't sound too pedantic, Beth, but you've got whiskey with an E and you've got whiskey without an E. Oh, so sorry, that was a mistake. And he said, but it's important because the Scots have no E or an E, I've forgotten. Whichever. But the Irish don't. But you give it the Irish spelling, but you go on then to say it's a Scotch. So you can't have both.
Oh, pedantic people.
No, I was very grateful for that feedback. I learned something.
Well, I love the fact that it's set in Melbourne. We've got to love a Melbourne and Victoria, because you go down to Cape Bridgewater and Hastings. But I sort of thought, the lawyer in you is, you've disguised everything. I mean, the hospitals have got different names, and I'm thinking, now where's that hospital and what? But so you've done the sort of, no one's going to try and say that this is any one place or one person. How hard was it to come up with the names?
Oh, that's easy. I mean, I've been writing a column called Sit Down Girly for over 30 years, and I've always done that with pseudonyms.
Yeah.
And it just became part of the fun.
Why the hyphenated names? Because the main character, Anita's got a hyphenated name, and so does the Attorney General, these two very powerful women.
Look, I apologise to all people with hyphenated names before I say anything, but it is a weeny bit pretentious to have a hyphenated name, and how many generations can you keep doing that to until we end up with as many bloody hyphens as we do footnotes in academic texts.
Beth Wilson, it's been an absolute delight
has the time gone already?
It's gone already, to be in conversation with you at the Apollo Bay Writers Fest. And can I also say, you are making waves. Continue to make waves. I know you will. And I want to say thank you to everybody who's listened. Go and buy Beth's book. It really is fabulous. Oh, I just hit my microphone. Oh, God, and I've been in media for 30 years. The Lost Lovelies Foundation, absolutely wonderful. And
by Laneway Press.
By Laneway Press. And can't wait to see your next book. When's it going to be ready?
We hope by the end of this year. Because it's actually very, very topical.
Yeah, great. Oh, look forward to that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Beth Wilson, author of The Lost Lovelies Foundation.
Thank you, Sally.
Warm Winter Words was brought to you by Apollo Bay WordFest in conjunction with Apollo Bay Arts and Jackson Hayat Films. We thank Writers Victoria and the Colac Otway Shire for their support of this event and look forward to you joining us again on the last Sunday in July in 2022.